Well, this afternoon, there's a deadly shooting at a Huntsville apartment complex yesterday. We have some new details on it as police just identified this victim behind me. That's 19-year-old Nadiya Perkins of Montgomery.
Our next step in this, now that he's been arrested, he's been booked in, is justice for the Perkins family. Right? They have a 19-year-old girl that lost her life to a tragic incident. So the next part of this is working with the Madison County District Attorney's Office and providing the evidence that they need to hold him accountable for the actions that he did.
A college freshman, a criminal justice major, a young woman who wanted to bring justice to the world, gone before she ever got the chance to try. And the man police say took her life? He wasn't a stranger. He was someone she knew. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell so you never miss a story like this one. And if you've been rocking with this channel, you already know what we do here. We find the truth, we tell the whole story, and we don't stop until every detail is on the table. Now let's get into it. Huntsville, Alabama, a city that carries two very different identities at the same time. On one hand, it's one of the fastest growing cities in the entire South, a hub of technology, aerospace, and innovation. People call it the Rocket City, and for good reason. NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center has called Huntsville home for decades, and the city has built an entire identity around progress, science, and ambition. On the other hand, like every American city, Huntsville has its quiet struggles. Its neighborhoods where life doesn't always match the polished image the city projects to the outside world. And it's in that complicated in-between space where this story begins. Just a few miles from downtown Huntsville sits Alabama A&M University, a historically black university with deep roots and an even deeper sense of community. The students who walk those grounds come from all over the South, arriving with big dreams and even bigger determination. One of those students was Nadiya Diana Elise Perkins, 19 years old, a freshman from Montgomery, Alabama, the same Montgomery that has carried the weight of history on its streets for generations. Nadiya had grown up in that city, watched its resilience, absorbed its strength, and by the time she arrived at Alabama A&M, she had already chosen her path. She was majoring in criminal justice. Think about that for a second. A young woman so moved by the idea of fairness, accountability, and truth that she decided to dedicate her academic life to understanding the very systems designed to protect people. She wanted to be part of the solution. That's who Nadiya was. People who knew her describe her as thoughtful and friendly, someone who made you feel seen when she talked to you. She wasn't just another face in a lecture hall. She was a presence. Her university would later remember her as a student with promise and purpose. And if you read between the lines of that statement, you can feel the grief underneath every single word. Because the people writing those words knew that Nadiya's story was supposed to be so much longer than this. Now, across town, there was a 20-year-old Huntsville man named Ahmad Khalil Barney. And this is where the story starts to shift. At this point in the investigation, police have confirmed one thing clearly. Barney and Nadiya knew each other. They had what investigators described as a qualifying relationship, which in legal terms typically points to a personal connection of some kind, though the exact nature of that relationship has not been fully disclosed to the public. What we do know is that whatever was between them, something went terribly wrong. And on the morning of March 4th, 2026, that something exploded into tragedy. The Candlewood Apartments sit on Julia Street near University Drive in Huntsville, a residential complex close enough to campus that students are a familiar presence there. It was just after 9 in the morning when the first calls came in. Shots fired. Officers were dispatched. And what they were about to find inside one of those apartments would set off a chain of events that would shake the entire city. What happened inside that apartment? And how did it take law enforcement 2 full days to find the man they believe is responsible? When Huntsville police officers arrived at the Candlewood Apartments that Wednesday morning, the scene that greeted them was one that no one who witnessed it will easily forget. Bystanders, ordinary people who happened to be nearby, were the ones who directed officers to the right building. Not a tip called in from a distance, not a surveillance system alert, but actual people standing outside, pointing law enforcement toward the truth. That detail matters, because it tells you something about how raw and immediate this scene was. This wasn't something that could be quietly contained or hidden. It was out in the open, and the community responded. Inside the apartment, officers found Nadiya Perkins, 19 years old, a criminal justice major who had her whole career ahead of her, gone. Madison County Coroner Dr. Tyler Berriel was called to the scene, and his findings were unambiguous. Nadiya had died from a gunshot wound, and her manner of death was ruled a homicide. There was no question about what had happened. The only question now was who was responsible and where they were. That answer came quickly, at least in terms of identification. Investigators moved fast, and within a short time they had a name: Ahmaud Khalil Barney, 20 years old, a Huntsville resident. A MUAD warrant was issued. But here's where things took a turn that made this case even more urgent and unsettling for the entire city. Barney wasn't in custody. He was out there, and with a MUAD warrant on his name and no sign of him turning himself in, Huntsville police made the decision to go public. They released his description: approximately 6 feet 1 inch tall, between 165 and 170 pounds. And they were direct with the community. Do not approach this man. He should be considered armed and dangerous. Can you imagine being a resident in that part of Huntsville on the morning of March 6th? 2 days after a young college student had been found SH0T inside an apartment in your neighborhood. And now police are telling you the suspect is still out there, somewhere close? That's not an abstract fear. That's a very real, very immediate feeling of vulnerability. And it was about to get even more intense. That same morning, workers at a local gas station spotted someone matching Barney's description and reported it. Officers responded quickly, converging on the area near Jordan Road and Shields Road. But when they got there, Barney ran. He fled on foot into a dense wooded area. And just like that, a manhunt that had already been building for 2 days kicked into a completely different gear. 9 units were deployed. Drones went up over the tree line. Officers moved through the woods methodically, covering ground, calling in positions. This was a full-scale search operation happening in the middle of a residential part of Huntsville on a Friday morning. And because of that, 5 Madison County schools were placed on secure perimeter status: Madison County Career Tech, MCVA, MT Carmel Elementary, Pace, and Riverton Intermediate. Hundreds of children locked in classrooms. Parents getting alerts on their phones. Teachers trying to keep kids calm while not fully knowing what was unfolding just outside. All of it because of one decision made inside an apartment 2 days earlier. The ripple effects of 6-0 lengths never stay contained the moment they happen. They spread. They touch people who never even knew Nadiya Perkins existed. And they force an entire community to stop and reckon with how close danger can get. Sergeant Chris Jackson of the Huntsville Police Department spoke to media at the scene during the search. He was measured but clear. He acknowledged the scale of what they were dealing with, the size of the search area, the proximity to homes and families. And he reminded the public that because Barney was wanted on an active MUAD warrant, every precaution had to be taken. The message was firm: stay inside, stay aware, let law enforcement do their work. But with Barney even still in those woods? And if not, where had he gone? As officers combed through that wooded area near Jordan Road, something was shifting behind the scenes. Investigators weren't just relying on the search teams on the ground. They were working their network, following up on every piece of information coming in. And at some point during those 2 hours of searching, a critical development emerged. Intelligence suggested that Barney had already slipped out of the area. He wasn't in those woods anymore. He had moved. And now investigators had a new location to work with: a residence on Century Street, not far from where the search had been focused. Officers redirected. They moved on that address. And just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, March 6th, Ahmaud Khalil Barney was taken into custody. No dramatic standoff. No further chase. He was arrested without incident, which in its own way raises a question worth sitting with. Why run to the woods in the morning and then surrender quietly in the afternoon? What changed in those few hours? That's something only Barney can answer, and so far, those answers haven't been made public. What had taken 2 full days, a massive manhunt, 9 units, drones, school lockdowns, and collective effort of multiple law enforcement agencies, Huntsville Police, the Madison County Sheriff's Office, The U.S. Marshals Gulf Coast Regional Fugitive Task Force and the Alabama A&M University Police Department had finally come to a resolution. Barney was booked, the warrant was served, and for the first time since that Wednesday morning, the people of Huntsville could exhale just a little. Sergeant Chris Jackson stepped back in front of the cameras after the arrest, and what he said was simple but heavy. He talked about justice. Not the procedural kind, not the abstract legal concept, but the personal kind, the kind that belongs to a family sitting in Montgomery, Alabama, trying to understand how their 19-year-old daughter left home to chase a dream and never came back. He said, "Our next step in this, now that he's been arrested and booked in, is justice for the Perkins family. They have a 19-year-old girl that lost her life to a tragic incident, and holding him accountable. The department confirmed it is working directly with the Madison County District Attorney's Office to move forward with prosecution. And as of now, the case is actively being built." Back at Alabama A&M, the grief was palpable. President Daniel K. Wims released a formal statement that acknowledged the loss not just as a tragedy, but as a wound to the entire university community. He called Nadiya a student with promise and purpose, and he reminded the campus that she will be honored at the university's memorial service later this year. Students were encouraged to reach out to the Office of Student Affairs for counseling, but anyone who has ever lost someone knows that no amount of institutional support fully fills that kind of absence. Her classmates lost a peer. Her professors lost a student. Her family lost everything. And Nadiya's aunt, Monica Ridgway, said exactly that. She told the world that the family felt completely blindsided, that Nadiya had purpose written all over her, that they were leaning on faith in each other to get through something that by all rights shouldn't have happened at all. A 19-year-old girl studying criminal justice, studying the very systems meant to protect people like her, became a victim of the exact kind of senseless 6-0 lens she had committed herself to understanding and fighting against. There is something deeply painful about that irony, something that demands we sit with it rather than move past it too quickly. Because this case isn't just about what happened inside one apartment on one Wednesday morning. It's about a pattern that shows up in communities across this country, again and again. Young lives, full of direction and ambition, cut short by 6-0 lens that traces back to personal connection gone wrong. Police confirmed that Barney and Nadiya knew each other, that there was a qualifying relationship between them, and statistically, that is not surprising. Study after study on harm one side in America points to the same uncomfortable truth. Most victims know their ATT occurs. Most of these tragedies don't begin with a stranger. They begin somewhere far more intimate, far more familiar, and for that reason, far more complicated to talk about. So here's what I want to leave you with today, and I genuinely want you to think about this. What does it say about how we handle conflict and pain when someone chooses permanent 6-0 lens as the answer to a personal situation? What would it take? What resources, what conversations, what systems to reach people before they cross that line? And for the families left behind, the ones who wake up every morning to an absence that never gets smaller, how do we as a society do better by them? Not just in the aftermath, but long before tragedy ever arrives at their door? Nadiya Perkins deserved to graduate. She deserved to become the criminal justice professional she was working toward. She deserved the full length of a life she had barely started. And the least we could do now is make sure her story is heard, her name is remembered, and that the conversation her case forces us to have actually leads somewhere meaningful. If this story moved you, share it. Put it on your page. Send it to someone who needs to hear it, because these stories don't just belong to people directly involved. They belong to all of us. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button, tap the bell, and stay connected, because we are just getting started.